You have a problem you have been trying to solve for years, maybe your whole life. You have attacked it from every angle, tried every solution, exhausted every strategy, and it is still there, unsolved, immovable, defeating you. And you have concluded that you are a failure, that there must be some answer you are too weak or too foolish to find. Jung wants to lift that burden off you because he made a discovery through long years of watching people wrestle with their deepest troubles that changes everything. The greatest and most important problems of life can never be solved. They can only be outgrown. You were never going to solve it. And the moment you understand why, you will stop wasting your strength on the impossible and turn it toward the one thing that actually works. Jung states the discovery plainly because it is one of the most freeing things he knew. The greatest and most important problems of life are all at bottom fundamentally insoluble. They must be because they're not puzzles with answers, but expressions of the deep oppositions and tensions that make up a human life. The conflict between freedom and security, the tension between your own needs and the needs of those you love, the pull between two goods that cannot both be had, the deep questions of meaning and mortality and how to live. These are not problems in the way that a broken machine is a problem, with a fix that, once found, makes the trouble disappear forever. They are the permanent conditions of being human, and no clever solution will ever dissolve them because they are woven into the very structure of existence. To spend your life demanding a final solution to such a problem is to set yourself an impossible task and then despair when you cannot accomplish it. Jung makes this concrete because in the abstract it can sound like an excuse for giving up, and it is the opposite of that. Think of the person torn for years between staying in a safe but lifeless situation and risking everything for something more alive. They turn the problem over and over, listing reasons for each side, certain that if they only think hard enough, they will find the one correct answer that dissolves the conflict. But there is no such answer because both safety and aliveness are real goods, and no amount of reasoning will ever make the loss of one painless. Or think of the person who cannot reconcile their duty to their own life with their duty to an aging parent and tortures themselves searching for the solution that will let them honor both perfectly, with no sacrifice and no guilt. There is no such solution. The two goods genuinely conflict, and the conflict cannot be reasoned away. These people are not failing to find an answer because they are stupid. They are failing because they are looking for an answer to a problem that has none. And the looking itself, the endless demand for a clean solution, is a large part of their suffering. And here's the first relief Jung wants to offer you before reaching the deeper one. Simply to understand that your deepest problem is insoluble, that you were never going to think your way to a clean answer can itself lift an enormous weight. So much of your exhaustion has come not from the problem itself, but from the desperate, doomed effort to solve the unsolvable, and from the self-condemnation that followed each failure. The moment you grasp that this kind of problem is not meant to be solved, you can lay down that particular torment. You can stop flogging yourself for failing at the impossible. You can stop believing that everyone else has found the answer, and only you are too weak to see it. The insolubility is not your personal failure. It is the nature of the problem. And knowing that is the first step toward the higher ground. But here is the part that turns despair into hope. And it is the heart of what Jung learned. Though these problems are never solved, they are constantly outgrown. He watched this happen again and again in the people he worked with, and it always came as a kind of quiet miracle. A person would be locked in a problem that seemed utterly insoluble, that consumed them, that they wrestled with day and night without the slightest progress, and then, after a time, the problem would lose its grip, not because they had finally solved it, but because they had grown larger than it. The problem had not changed. They had changed. Some new and wider interest had appeared on their horizon, some larger view of life, and seen from that larger view, the once overwhelming problem simply lost its urgency. It did not get answered. It faded because the person confronting it had become bigger than the thing that once overwhelmed them. Jung wants you to understand exactly what happens here, because it is not a trick and it is not avoidance. The problem is not repressed, not pushed out of sight, not denied. It is still there, fully real. But it now appears in a different light, and because it appears in a different light, it becomes, in a sense, a different problem. What had once thrown the person into the wildest conflicts and the most desperate panic now seemed manageable, almost small, because they were viewing it from a higher place. Jung gives the image he always found truest for this. Imagine a violent thunderstorm raging in a valley. If you are down in the valley, in the middle of the storm, it is everything. The lightning and the wind and the flood are your whole world, terrifying and inescapable. But now imagine climbing to the top of a high mountain and looking down at that same storm from above. The thunderstorm is not robbed of its reality. It still rages in the valley exactly as before, but you are no longer in it. You are above it, watching it from a height, and from that height the storm that was your whole world is now one feature of a vast landscape. Nothing about the storm has changed. Everything about your relationship to it has changed because you have risen above it. This is what it means to outgrow a problem rather than solve it. You do not make the storm stop. You climb the mountain. You grow to a level of consciousness, a breadth of life, from which the problem that once filled your whole sky becomes one part of a larger picture, no longer able to dominate you, no longer the master of your every waking thought. The insoluble conflict that once tore you apart in the valley is still there in the valley, but you are no longer trapped down in it. You have grown up and out and above, and from that new height it has lost the power it had over the smaller self you used to be. You may wonder what this higher ground actually is, this new level from which the problem shrinks. It is not a clever new idea about the problem, not a fresh argument, not a better strategy on the same old plane. It is a genuine enlargement of the self, a widening of who you are. When a person is wholly identified with one small set of concerns, when their whole world is the valley, then a problem in that valley is, to them, the entire universe, and it overwhelms them utterly. But as a person grows, as new and wider interests open in them, as their sense of life deepens and broadens, the very ground of their being expands. They become a larger person with a larger life, in which the old problem is now only one element among many, set within a much greater whole. The problem did not shrink. The person grew, and in growing, gained a perspective in which the problem found its proper, smaller place. This is why you cannot reach the higher ground by trying harder at the same level. You reach it by becoming a bigger human being, and that is a matter of growth, not of cleverness, and growth of this kind cannot be forced or hurried, which is why patience is so essential here. You cannot simply decide one morning to be larger than your problem and make it so by an act of will. The enlargement comes in its own time, through the slow work of living, struggling, suffering, and developing, often without your even noticing it is happening. One day you realize that the thing which a year ago consumed your every thought now occupies a much smaller place, that you can think of it without being swallowed by it, that you have somehow risen without ever quite seeing yourself climb. This is the deep reason for hope in the midst of an insoluble problem. Even when you can see no answer, even when the wrestling seems to go nowhere, the growth is happening beneath the surface, and the height you cannot yet imagine is being built in you, stone by stone, by the very struggle that feels so fruitless. Now you may ask, if you cannot solve the problem, how do you grow large enough to outgrow it? And this is the crucial point, the thing that redeems all the struggle. You do not grow by abandoning the problem. You grow precisely by working at it. The meaning and purpose of a great problem, Jung came to believe, lies not in its solution, but in our working at it incessantly. It is the very labor of wrestling with the insoluble that develops us, stretches us, forces us to grow. The problem is like a weight that you cannot lift, but in straining against it, your strength increases, until one day you are strong enough that the weight, though no lighter, no longer holds you down. The wrestling is not wasted just because you never win it. The wrestling is the whole point. It is the thing that grows you to the size at which the problem can finally be outgrown. So all those years you thought you were failing to solve your problem, you may in fact have been doing the only thing that could ever help, growing to the struggle toward the larger self that will one day rise above it. And there is something Jung must add, because it protects you from a real danger. Since the meaning lies in working at the problem and not in solving it, you must not abandon the struggle out of despair at never solving it. The person who, finding the problem insoluble, simply gives up and turns away, does not outgrow it. He is left stunted, hardened, stultified, because it was the very working at the problem that would have grown him. The growth comes only through staying engaged, through continuing to wrestle honestly even when no solution appears, while releasing the desperate demand that the wrestling must end in a final answer. This is the balance, to keep working at the problem with all your heart, and at the same time to let go of the illusion that solving it is the goal. Work as if it could be solved. Understand that it will instead be outgrown. Hold those two together, and the struggle that was crushing you becomes the very thing that lifts you. Jung dwells for a moment on something in the image of the storm and the mountain, because it guards against a misunderstanding that could cheapen everything he is saying. When you rise above the storm is not robbed of its reality. This is important. To outgrow a problem is not to decide it never mattered, not to belittle the genuine pain it caused, not to look down from your height with cold detachment and pretend the suffering in the valley was nothing. The storm was real. Your suffering was real. The conflict that tore you apart truly tore you apart. Outgrowing does not erase the reality of what you went through. It changes your position in relation to it. You honor the storm as real, and you are no longer destroyed by it. This is a far deeper thing than mere positive thinking or talking yourself out of your troubles. It is the genuine attainment of a height from which the real storm, still real, no longer governs you. And the person who has truly outgrown a great problem usually carries a particular compassion for those still down in the valley, because he remembers exactly how total the storm felt when he was in it, and he does not despise them for being overwhelmed by what once overwhelmed him. There is also a quiet dignity that comes to a person through this, and it is worth naming. The one who has wrestled a great insoluble problem for years and grown through that wrestling and finally risen above it is not the same as the one who simply never faced anything hard. He has been deepened by the struggle. He carries a gravity, a seasoned strength, a breadth of understanding that can only be won by long grappling with what cannot be solved. The very problems you most resent, the ones that have refused for years to yield, are quietly making you into a larger and deeper human being than any easy life could have produced. And so even in the thick of the struggle, before any height is reached, you can hold this truth. The wrestling is not a sign that something has gone wrong with your life. It is the very process by which a great soul is slowly made. So here is what Jung wants you to carry away. The greatest problems of life are never solved. They are only outgrown. They are insoluble because they are the permanent tensions of being human, not puzzles with answers. And to demand a final solution is to set yourself an impossible task and despair. But though they are never solved, they are constantly outgrown, as some wider view of life appears, and the once overwhelming problem loses its urgency, not answered but seen from a height, like a storm in the valley viewed from the mountaintop. You climb to that height not by abandoning the problem but by working at it. For the labor of wrestling the insoluble is the very thing that grows you to the size at which it can be outgrown. So stop punishing yourself for failing to solve what was never meant to be solved. Keep working at it, release the demand for a final answer, and let the long struggle grow you, until one day you find yourself standing above the storm that once was your whole world. If this lifted a weight you have carried too long, write 2 words in the comments so you mark it and so others find it. Write outgrow it. and tell me about a problem you once thought would end you, that you can now see only from a great height. And when you are ready, come with Jung to the next one, because there is a part of yourself you have always treated as your worst weakness, the clumsy, undeveloped, inferior side you are ashamed of. And it is precisely there, in your weakest place, that the door to your greatest growth is hidden. That is where we go next.